Effective striking and grappling shall be considered the first priority of round assessments. Effective aggressiveness is plan B and should not be considered unless the judges do not see any advantages in the effective striking or the grappling. Guys, let's look at their definition of effective striking and grappling. Legal blows that have an immediate or cumulative impact with the potential to contribute towards the end of the match, with the immediate weighing in more heavily than the cumulative. And the immediate is actually boldened when you look at the rules of MMA, guys. Successful execution of takedowns, submissions, reversals, and the achievement of advantageous positions that produce immediate impact with the potential to end the match, with the immediate weighing in more heavily than the cumulative impact. Guys, they are the word for word written down rules of the MMA scoring criteria. And if you actually pay attention to the opening of every single pay-per-view, the start of the card also has a rough outline of the breakdown of the rules of MMA. I don't think DC and the commentary team have actually sat down and read the rules since they were released. Lying down on someone and not doing any ground and pound doesn't attribute to any damage leading to an immediate end of the fight, which means lying down and doing basic wrestling without ground and pound doesn't score you any points at all. And there's two parts to that rule. It's the striking and the grappling, which means you can't just be jabbing at air or punching on the guard. You've actually got to be landing your shots and doing damage. Now, why are we bringing all this up? Because you've seen the Twitter reaction to last night's fight. You know what people have been saying. They're thinking it's a robbery. I don't understand how you can actually go back and watch that fight and think it's a robbery. Now, round one was clearly Bassil's round, and round two's was clearly JDM's round. When Bassil was on the feet, he was striking away at JDM, everything was landing on the guard, and most things were missing. And when it did actually get down onto the ground towards the end of the round, which JDM was clearly winning up until that point, when it did get down onto the ground, it wasn't even Bassil that caused the takedown. It was JDM that caused the takedown. And because he is a cage fighter, not a scientist, he rolled into a guillotine and put himself into a bad position. His fight IQ on the night was not there. Guys, I can understand not having a fight IQ when you're 10 minutes deep into what is essentially a war and what is your 14-0 undefeated streak getting put on the line. I can understand freaking out in the moment and making bad decisions. But it was JDM that made the bad decision, and it was JDM that put himself into that bottom position. And when Bassil was on top of him in that top position, he didn't land a single strike. Go back and watch that fight, guys. Go back onto your Fight Pass and watch that fight in slow motion for those 2 minutes and see if you can count a single strike. There was a half-ass attempt at a guillotine that was barely in for 10 seconds. That does not contribute to an immediate ending of the fight if it's not actually properly in, which means you cannot score that second round to Bassil. And quite frankly, that third round, when you go back and look at the rest of the card, I believe on that card there were 3 10-8 rounds given out, and that last round stood for about a 10-8 round as much as a 10-8 round could last night, which means not only should Jack Della Maddalena have won, but he should have won by a significant margin. So the fact that Twitter has blown up today about it being a robbery, I honestly believe it's Daniel Cormier's fault. It's Daniel Cormier's fault because of the way that he was leading the commentary team. And it wasn't just Daniel Cormier. Like I said, he was leading the entire commentary team. When you go back and watch that fight, you'll hear the whole team talking about it at the end of the fight, how Bassil had done enough to win the second round, and who knows what was the scores going into the third round. When if you actually slow down and think about the fight and look at the fight, it was very clear who had won the second round. And when you go back and watch the first round, you could even put in an argument that JDM won the first round. Bassil had a ton of control time. There was only a couple of shots that were actually thrown on the feet, and they all landed with significant damage from JDM. When Bassil was doing the control time, he wasn't landing any ground and pound. He went for one submission attempt, but he just lay on him, which is the last thing that should be scored by the judges if there's nothing else in the round to score. If there's nothing else in the round 2 score. And in both round 1 and certainly in round 2, there was plenty to score. JDM nearly finished. The Weasel MMA actually did a great video of this, breaking it down with every single strike out there. And JDM nearly tripled his strikes and landed a 6-piece combination on the body and the head. Bassil was landing on the guard. He was throwing head kicks. They were landing on the guard. He was swinging elbows. They were going over the top. I think in round 2, Bassil may have landed 4 significant strikes, if that, just off the top of my head, whereas JDM clearly outstruck him. Daniel Cormier and the US wrestling team out there need to accept the fact that wrestling is just as good at jabbing at open air if you're not doing any significant damage on the ground. I know that wrestling might be the best base for MMA, but it's only the best base for MMA when it comes to controlling the fight and putting damage on your opponent. And if you're not putting damage on your opponent, it is essentially doing nothing. You're just wasting time. And if your opponent has even striking up from the bottom and causing significant damage, then your opponent is successfully scoring against you. Part of the blame also has to be put on the UFC broadcast team as well. Justin Geatje is a massive name. He's going to be fighting and headlining the pay-per-view later this month. And Justin Geatje, he trains with Bassil. So he was tweeting during the middle of the fight that Bassil was winning, and they put that up on the screen. So now you've got Daniel Cormier, an Olympic wrestler, and Justin Geatje, Bassil's teammate, all having their say, and you don't have anyone from the opposition or anyone who's actually watching the fight properly. You don't have their voice coming across on the screen. So of course the entire fan base is going to be thinking that the fight is going the other way. Then we get to the scorecards. It's very clearly a JDM win, and we have this massive controversy. Of course, it doesn't help that the card yesterday wasn't exactly the most high-profile card in the world, which means that this controversial moment is one of the things that's going to be taking up most of the headlines. But JDM, he got the win. And personally, I'm happy that he learnt these lessons and had this much of a close fight this early on in his career, guys. I would have been very upset to see this happen when JDM was in the top 5. It's much better that this is happening now. But this bias commentary coming from DC and from the US wrestling team, it has to stop. Like, if you believe that Bassil won that fight, then you must believe that Robert Whittaker beat Israel Adesanya, because the whole argument for Robert Whittaker losing to Izzy is that Robert didn't apply enough damage when he was on top of Izzy. And now you got the exact same people who are saying that Bassil should have won because he had the control time, when he applied no damage to JDM during that control time. It's just madness. I honestly think they need to actually print out the rules and glue them to the monitor in front of DC when he's calling these fights, because he loves wrestling that much. He just can't see past it. Guys, how did you score the fight? Am I way off here? Maybe I'm being biased because I'm the Aussie and JDM was fighting and I'm not such a big fan of wrestling, but I'm pretty sure we're seeing this with a clear head. Let me know how you saw it down in the comments below. If you guys have been enjoying these videos, maybe consider subscribing, and I'll see you all in the next one.